I am so excited to welcome us to this event. This is intended to be an interdisciplinary conversation involving the Climate Psychiatry Alliance and the Bangor Theological Seminary, in which we grapple with spiritual aspects of climate change. The main participants in this conversation are Dr. Janet Lewis, a co-founder of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and the Reverend Nicole Deeroff, who is the Associate Director of the BTS Center in Portland, Maine. Yes, if you both want to raise your hands. Yeah, yay! Um, I can tell you, I have had the great fortune to be in several conversations with these women already, and I am so, so, so excited for tonight. Also, we have here the Reverend Allison Cornish, who is the BTS Center's Chaplaincy Initiative Coordinator, and she is going to help with facilitating the second half of our conversation. I also would like to thank Jana, who is the CPA Membership Coordinator, who is helping with tech support. And finally, a big thank you to Robin Cooper. There's Heidi. I see Heidi. If you want to wave, Heidi. Hi, co-lead of the Midwest Hub. And Robin Cooper, yes, thank you. So Robin is also a co-founder of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance and is the current president of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance and helped in organizing and arranging this event for tonight. We also would be very interested to hear who else is in the room with us tonight, the many, many, many faces and folks who are here with us. So now we would like for you to, in the chat, we would invite you to enter your name, where you're coming from, and then I'm going to give you two options. Maybe a word or two of what you think of when you think of spirituality in a climate changed world. That's a big topic. So you also can write the name of something that inspires you in nature. So we have Heidi Woods from Geneva, Illinois, who enjoys sunshine. A participant from Tucson who writes hummingbirds. Nicole from Portland, and redback salamanders. Wow, Martha Kane, Western Massachusetts, God's role in climate change. Emily Forrest from Worcester, Massachusetts. Robin, inspired by the sounds of birds. Lovely. I let Sue Penny, the groundhog in my backyard. And I will let you continue to read those. Oh, wow. I want to read this one too. A geriatric psychiatrist on Vancouver Island. I think of spirituality as an antidote to despair. That's really lovely. What a way to open. Yes, if you can continue so we can see who all is joining us tonight. This is really lovely. And I will say, oh, Tony, Tony and Madison. I see the climate crisis as undermining a sense of legacy and meaning, and at the same time, I see it as a great opportunity to affirm solidarity and hope. That's really beautiful. All right. So in our conversation today, we have Dr. Janet Lewis, who as I said, is a co-founder of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, an organization of psychiatrists raising awareness about the impacts of climate change on mental health. She is also a clinical assistant professor at University of Rochester and is in general private practice and has backgrounds in psychodynamic, humanistic, and transpersonal schools of thought. She is additionally a co-chair of the Climate Committee of the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry And she is on faculty of the Climate Aware Therapy course for therapists of all stripes, a joint project of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance and the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. Welcome, Janet. And we also have Reverend Nicole Dieroff, who is an ordained United Church of Christ minister. She works currently as the Associate Director of the BTS Center, and is responsible for the center's programs focusing on nurturing spiritual leadership for a climate changed world. She previously served as the Associate Director at the Interfaith Center of Greater Philadelphia, and she is a master naturalist. That is hard to say 3 times fast. A Maine master naturalist. I have learned so many little nature tidbits from Nicole. And she is the mother to a very, very lovely 5th grader. Finally, about Nicole, I will tell you we were college roommates at Ohio Wesleyan University. So she is one of my very dear and lifelong friends. And she's also familiar with my ability to make large laundry piles. So,
Yes, true.
welcome, Nicole and Janet. Um, By way of opening, I would like to tell you just a very brief story about how I developed some insight around climate change. And for me, that had sort of three kind of factors and facets. So for me, I knew about climate change, but I really started to realize what it was during the COVID-19 pandemic. As we watched the world trying to respond to this global health crisis, I think it just drew so many parallels for me to climate change. Additionally, in that moment, I had a baby in November of 2019. So around the time that the COVID-19 pandemic started, he was 4 to 6 months old. I was nursing him, and he developed an all over body rash that we just could not could not define or understand for a while. He eventually was diagnosed with 10 different food allergies, and he is fine now. But what it meant for us as a family is that immediately and overnight, we had to just drastically change our diet. We had to remove wheat and soy and milk and eggs and peanuts and tree nuts. And what it really caused me to think about, it just caused me to think a little bit more about change and the drivers of change. And it also caused me to realize that big changes really are possible, especially if the health of your children are dependent on it. So, with that story, I would like to invite Nicole and Janet to tell us how you developed your own insights related to climate change.
Well, I guess I can go first. Um, of course, people come to this in different ways. I mean, for me, it was really very sudden. It was in a moment when I was at a conference, an integral theory conference. Integral theory is this big meta model of reality, and most of the people involved with it, unlike me, are extremely experienced meditators, and I had a suite mate there who, unlike most of the people there who were in this sort of state of equanimity, she was quite agitated about climate change, and she looked me in the eye and she said, "The bottom line, Janet, is that we may be able to adjust to 2 degrees. But right now we're on track for over 4 degrees. And that will create an Earth we would not recognize." And and in that moment, that it just the information penetrated. It penetrated. I'd heard it before, but for some reason it really penetrated in that moment, and I had this clarity where I just said, "Okay, this is the most important thing going on." In short order, I thought about what I'm good at doing, what I can do. I looked for like-minded colleagues, and the several of us, small group, ended up starting the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. And so that experience left me with this question about what allows for that. What allows for the information to penetrate? Um, what provides sufficient containment? I mean, as I said, this conference, it was spiritually oriented. It was also very intellectually expansive. Uh, and there are things known psychologically about containment. There are ways that containment happens, primarily relationally, but in other ways too. And one thing that provides containment is spirituality. And I had seen An Inconvenient Truth when it first came out, and I believed it. Um, but I really thought that it was the province of people above my pay grade. Some people in international relations, maybe some engineers. I mean, and it didn't occur to me at the time, back then, almost 20 years ago. It didn't occur to me that, of course, it wasn't going to be easy for those people to take this information in an actionable way and work on large transformations of systems. Um, and that kind of containment that's required um, is something that, like I say, it's sort of my ongoing question here.
Thanks for that story, Janet. For me, around the time I was sharing a bunk bed with Emily, I was a environmental studies major, and I spent a summer studying sustainable forestry on Vancouver Island, and came home really fired up. I got married shortly after, and my grandfather offered to make a piece of furniture for my husband and I told him I wanted him to use sustainable wood for that piece of furniture. And it is insanely heavy because wood growing in a sustainable forest grows very slowly and the tree rings are very tight. So I have had a love of nature and a concern around sustainability for a long time. Part of my journey took me to seminary. I became ordained in the United Church of Christ, and my first call to ministry was at the Interfaith Center of Greater Philadelphia, where diversity meant different humans, different religious humans. I now get to do diversity that includes more than humans. So 6 years ago, my family moved to Maine following my husband's career, and now I serve the BTS Center. We are the organizational successor to Bangor Theological Seminary, and our mission is to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. And when I encountered that mission statement, I thought it was awesome and I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I wanted to be part of it. So at this point, our organization is focused on spiritual leadership for a climate changed world. And it is really in this job that I have come to encounter the realities of climate change, which frankly are different from what I was learning in college in the 90s in my environmental studies classes. I would say that the story of More by Hope Jaron really opened my eyes early on in this position. She has chapters on how there are now more humans, there's more agriculture, there's more energy, there's more, a story of more on a finite planet. And so in this role, I am having ongoing insights on what is happening to our planet. I think I understand that when the media says, there's this line they say, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. I don't think I knew what that meant until really getting deeply involved in this work, to know that that means extreme famine. It means potential civil unrest and violence and desperation. And so it's real. So I'm trying to be open-hearted as I'm honest to reality. That's like a day-to-day thing, I think, in this work.
Wow. Yes. Thank you. Thank you both so much, so much. And Nicole, your reference to Vancouver Island is definitely taking me back. And I remember that summer where you were so fired up and coming back from that. I definitely remember that. And Janet, I am interested in your phrase, what allows for information to penetrate? I think that's an interesting, really interesting question. And it would seem to me that in this moment in a climate change world, that part of what might help us to have the information penetrate is, or to sort of understand what's happening, is a spiritual response. Yet religious practices in this country are declining, and spirituality seems to have lost or maybe never to have had a place in psychiatry. So what do you think about that, or what do we do about that?
Maybe I'll start with the religion dynamics, Janet. You can then move into some of the psychiatry pieces. So, as a clergy person, I will say that we are paying attention to the nons and nuns and SBNRs. So the nons are those who check non-religious on that box. The nuns are those who check none in the what is your religion list of options. And SBNRs are spiritual but not religious. So you may use those phrases less if you're a psychiatrist, but as clergy, these are things that we're paying attention to. All of those categories are on the rise. And at the same time, I have been tracking some of the New York Times work that came out just in April. There was a deep, rich series called Believing by Lauren Jackson. And I want to read one quote from that because maybe we're not as non and nunny as they say we are. So it says, America seems to be acknowledging this widespread spiritual hunger. America's secularization is on pause. People have stopped leaving churches, and religion is taking a more prominent role in public life. In my reporting, I found that there are many reasons for this shift in American life. Researchers say the pandemic and the country's limited social safety nets have inclined people to stick with, or even turn to, religion for support. But there's another reason too. Many Americans are dissatisfied with the alternatives to religion. They feel an existential malaise and they're looking for help. People want stronger communities, more meaningful rituals, and spaces to express their spirituality. They're also longing to have richer, more nuanced conversations about belief. I admit my local church has not seen tons of people streaming in the door in relationship to this article, but it does. America is different. A lot of people ascribe belief. So yes, religion is diminishing, but we're still out there. The BTS Center also has been really inspired by this book, which is called Refugia Faith, and it's authored by a woman named Deborah Rienstra. And for Deborah, and we have so adopted this mentality, small is not insignificant. So for all of our spiritual leaders who are tending rather small, sometimes aging communities, small is not insignificant. Refugia is a biological concept. It means hidden shelters where life persists and out of which new life emerges. It has been studied deeply in times of great devastation, like volcanic eruptions. The way that green comes back is through refugia, these tiny pockets of enduring life that reaches out for others. So Deborah and the BTS Center is asking, she says in the introduction, how can people of faith become people of refugia? How can we find and create refugia not only in the biomes of the earth, but simultaneously in our human cultural systems and in our spirits? We will need a tough new kind of resilience and a greater capacity for cooperation. So we imagine being people of spiritual refugia. And we may be small, but small is significant.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, Nicole. I think we're also dealing with refugia in psychiatry.
Aha!
But I do, I do. Um, of course, psychiatry's been under the influence, I think, of modernism with this interest, this focus on um, objectivity and a real individualism. But if you look at the roots of psychiatry, it's there are things there that are not about nailing things down. I mean, in psychiatry, we've got, well, for diagnoses, you have to have so many and such and such a category. It's all about nailing things down.
Mm.
And even with the way we tend to think and talk about the medications, there are these models based on science, these models for how the medicines work, but they're just models. And we forget they're just models, and we talk about it as though it's reality when there are a lot of ways in which we don't really know how the medicines work. So there's been all this narrowing, nailing things down, which I think is a very sort of modernist way of doing things. But there are these refugia, there are these roots in psychiatry that I just love that term because they're not vestigial, they're still alive. Um, and the psychoanalytic tradition, for example, where there's an appreciation of two unconsciouses in the room, the things that are going on in that intersubjective space are larger, than anyone could completely define. This is why any psychoanalytically oriented therapist can tell you about repeated experiences of getting a stray odd thought in their mind, like some little wisp of a memory of their own or some little fantasy of their own, and it seems not related to anything, but actually it's related to the next thing that comes out of the patient's mouth. There's an appreciation of being in a larger space with what's happening. Um, and of course, Jung to really dove into the unconscious and collective unconscious, and with a lot of frankly spiritual material and creativity, but also the humanistic tradition in psychiatry. I think is a real refugia. I'm trying to find a way to not be staring at myself. Um, in that, in that the humanistic tradition, which has an evidence base, is about uh, uh, is about the human to human connection, the authentic ground in our humanity, which I think is very much a larger space. And in the humanistic tradition, there's an appreciation for the transformative potential of struggle, of human struggle. And I'm sure other people can think of other psychiatric roots also that have this sort of spiritual alignment. Um, and then there are also these current movements in psychiatry that have a kind of that are about opening to larger space, that have this sort of spiritual alignment, like psychedelic facilitated treatment, which really opens to much larger space and larger possibilities and all these connections that had been closed off before, or the incorporation of mindfulness in so many treatments. Of course, that often gets used in a very instrumental way, been called McMindfulness. Um, but there's a lot of potential there for it actually being something much larger, or the incorporation of nature therapies. Again, it's opening to larger space. So I want to just show a couple of images here uh, in illustrating some of this. Um, so here's can you all see this? Did I share my screen? Yes.
Yep.
Um, so so here I decided not to fill in these bubbles, but because I'm sure so many more things could be thought of, that there are these spiritually aligned roots and spiritually aligned current and future possible movements. And here, the next figure here, if I can get it. Whoop, okay, I'm gonna have to get out and go back in. The next figure is from Jung's Red Book. Um, am I okay? I'm not screen sharing now, am I? Let's try again. From Jung's Red Book, the figure that gets called the Tree of Life, and can you all see that? Um, it it's I think it really incorporates the kind of the grittiness of experience there at the bottom, as well as this transformative potential with what's in the upper part of it. So there are these roots that I just wanted to emphasize that are still alive, I think, refugia in psychiatry.
Thank you so much. I feel like that picture even makes me want to open open into something bigger, right? But Janet, I feel like that was a nice sort of transition too. You talked about how psychiatry wants to nail things down or makes this effort to nail things down, and sometimes things that are not sort of nail downable. But in our profession and educational climate conversations, we often prioritize intellectual understanding. I mean, what practices or approaches can help us to forge a more profound connection to grief, trauma, and distress that are inherently tied to these issues?
Um, Well, it's so interesting you say it that way, what can forge more of a connection to these distressing
Mm,
experiences? Because
mm,
of course it's counterintuitive that would be
mm,
desirable, right?
Mm.
Um,
mm-hmm.
but in
I might
both,
argue otherwise, though.
oh, of course, no, I'm not going to argue that. Okay, well, in the literature on post-traumatic growth,
Yeah,
um,
right.
yeah.
You're
Uh,
trying to move away from those.
in what goes on with post-traumatic growth is that there is these repeated prolonged experiences of being in contact with distressing uh,
Mm,
emotions in these circumstances where one's sense of identity has kind of been shattered, where everything
mm,
um, is no longer certain. Um, and then what can come out of that is change that's so substantial it looks transformational. And so in terms of practices, what can help with this, um, I think of three kinds. I mean, one kind is um, the practices that give us permission to be there in the first place. Um, that sort of hold the space open for this reality that we've got these experiences, and that it makes sense to be with them. Um, and I think what's involved in that is being able to have succinct ways of describing it in our minds that give us that permission. Um, Things like uh, dark optimism, which was the term from the Dark Mountain Project in Britain, or Viktor Frankl called it tragic optimism. Or a term I've recently heard that I think is terrific is post tragedy. And all of these appreciate the need um, to repeatedly incorporate tragedy, that it's not something that we just um, get over, get through, work through. No, there's this repeated incorporation in a way that also allows for the rest of life. That also allows for all the other experience too. And then the next kind of practice are presencing practices. like meditation, like a prayer kind of practice, practices that allow us to in a state that's accessing parasympathetic activity, witness these various experiences that come up. Um, I'm a big fan of the work of Thomas Hubel. Maybe some people have heard of him. He has what gets called a three sync practice that involves witnessing of somatic and emotional and cognitive experience. And I think it is really important that we think about somatic treatments and interventions, because a lot of the feelings are so big. They're in the body, as well as being accessed in other ways. So in these presencing practices, um, what's going on is that there's, as I say, the accessing of the parasympathetic in order to feel safe enough to be able to be with the experiences, and so that they can be metabolized. But it's more than that, right? It's more than that. It's not just this instrumental thing for us to use. It's also in these practices, there's a recognition of and surrender to larger space uh, as this is done.
Mhm.
And so this muscle gets developed. This muscle that has to do with that, with the recognition and moving into larger space. Right. And this is, I really think, part of what's needed in being able to make the transformative changes that are required. And people should look for the kind of presencing practice that works for them. I mean, when many years ago, when I was at that conference and most people were expert meditators, I wasn't an expert meditator. I mean, it took me a very long time to find, and I wouldn't call myself an expert meditator now, but it took me a very long time to find a practice that feels fit to me. And so people should keep at it until they find something that feels right for them. And then a third kind of practice is just relational, having other people that you can talk to in this space who are also grappling at all sorts of levels with climate change.
Thanks for that framing, Janet. I like your brain words for some things that we kind of just like do in worship. um, so I'm gonna answer this question with sharing a song. The song I'm gonna share is called "Is This How the World Ends?" and it's by a group called The Many. And the origin story of this song is that the BTS Center was offering program after program where we were talking about, in our intellectual way, how important it is to be honest and acknowledge our grief. And Allison and I thought maybe we should not just talk about this, but actually create spaces to experience this. So we found this group, The Many, who are incredible musicians and liturgists. And during COVID, we're hosting online spaces to hold the lament around the pandemic. So they had experience with online lament. Now, lament is a little different than grief. I think about two differences. One, lament is directed to the divine. And two, lament is collective. It is not individual. So we created a whole series called Lament with Earth. We now are showing it. We're in our 5th year of sharing these productions seasonally. What I have for you is one of the musical productions that's part of, this is about 3 minutes of a 40-minute production that we gather around in a seasonal way. And this song reflects the Psalms from the Christian Bible, in the way that it holds strong emotions. The Psalms are emotional in so many ways and grant permission for really strong emotions. And the Psalms consistently will move from sorrow, a really strong anger, to, by the end, there's gratitude and praise. So you will see that movement in this song I'm sharing. If this feels prayerful to you, I invite you to engage with it in that manner. Otherwise, please just observe and know that there are people who do gather around this in a worshipful way.
The sky is filled with fire tonight. The smoke fills our lungs. What are we doing? What have we done? What are we doing? What have we done? Water's running dark tonight. We're drinking a ruin. What are we doing? What have we done? What are we doing? What have we done? We can't say we didn't know. We can't say we didn't see. Our tears don't mean a thing if we turn away again. Is this how the world ends? Is this how the world ends? The city's washed in tears tonight. Hope is on the run. What are we doing? What have we done? What are we doing? What have we done? We can't say we didn't know. We can't say we didn't see. Our tears don't mean nothing if we turn away again. Is this how the world ends? Is this how the world ends? For the beauty of the earth, for all life that lives on it. Forgive us, help us speak the truth, help us love the way you do. Help us love, help us love, help us love the way you do. Help us love, help us love, help us love the way you do. Help us love, help us love, help us love the way you do. Help us love the way you do.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nicole, and what a just creative response to a question about how we over intellectualize. I am wondering, so it is 7:42, and I have one more burning question, but I also don't want to cut our audience off from asking their questions. So I'm wondering if we should start to do that now. Um, and what I will say is that everyone is welcome at this point to enter questions into the chat. And if we have some right away, we can ask those, and if not, maybe I will go ahead with my final question.
Emily, I think you should move forward on your question.
Okay. Okay. So last month I attended the American Psychiatric Association in LA. Yay, California, Robin, or yeah. Um, but at the conference, I went to a seminar on disaster psychiatry, and in that seminar, they used the term negative capability. That term was introduced, and so I've since learned a little bit more about it. As offered on the Poetry Foundation website, negative capability is, quote, a theory first articulated by John Keats about the artist's access to truth without the pressure and framework of logic or science. Keats supposed that a great thinker is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. As we acknowledge the inherent uncertainty surrounding climate change and the multiplicity of potential futures, how do you personally conceptualize or engage with the future? And also within this complex and unpredictable landscape, where and how do you find or cultivate hope?
So I like that you called 3 questions one, but I have something to say to each
You
of
can't
what
do
I
that
heard
to
as 3
patients.
questions. So let me say, I'll just say something to uncertainty, something to engaging the future, and something to hope. All of these things are topics that we are engaging with at the BTS Center very regularly. So what I'll say to uncertainty is a reference to this book, which is called Life After Doom. The author is Brian McLaren, who's a pretty popular Christian author. And who writes on many, many different things. But his most recent book, Life After Doom, the subtitle Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart, and is written for and about a climate changed world. And in this book, Brian presents 4 scenarios as he's thinking about the future. Scenario 1, he calls collapse avoidance. Scenario 2, he calls collapse rebirth. Scenario 3, he calls collapse survival. And scenario 4, he calls collapse extinction. The thing is, all 4 of them have the word collapse in it. So it's bad news bears. And what he says is, I don't know which of these 4 it's going to be. Maybe it's on the better side. Maybe it's on the worse side. But we don't know. And what we need to figure out is how to live with the uncertainty of unknowing. So the rest of the book is postures and practices. He talks about contemplation. He talks about art. He talks about how we build our brains to hold paradox. He talks about building skills of curiosity, embracing death and impermanence, turning to indigenous wisdom. The book is full of, we're not going to know, so how do we live with not knowing and be our best selves within that? The thing I want to say about engaging the future is I engaged the future last week by planting a fruit tree in my yard with my 11-year-old. We believe at the BTS Center in imagination. It's in our mission statement. And so we work to cultivate imagination. One of the ways we do that is by engaging with fiction. This summer, we're picking up 3 fiction books as an organization and inviting people to read them with us. This fall, we're working with GRIST and their climate fiction program to offer a workshop for our eco-preachers, people who are stepping into pulpits. How can they paint a picture of a future that, yes, is different, but that we want to live into, and that we trust that the human capacity to love will endure? and a comment on hope. We have found over and over again that hope is found in honesty. That's what life after doom is all about. It's saying yes to the doom part that leads to the life part. When we did an event with Brian McLaren, we said, in what ways have you experienced life after doom? And the list in the chat it just was so extensive. The ways in which people who are honest about the situation are finding life-giving relationships, life-giving work. They're finding life. I have a fierce belief in the human capacity to love. And we get to choose who we want to be in this moment. And that's what the hope is about. It is not Pollyanna hope. The hope that we are holding is a complicated hope. And for anyone who wants to kind of noodle in this space with us, our most recent podcast episode was literally called Hope, ? It's complicated. So we are in this conversation about hope. We did events in the previous year with Margaret Wheatley and Catherine Hayhoe all around how do we be both honest and filled with a sense of possibility. Janet, I don't know if you're going to go for all three or just pick one.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. But I'll start with hope.
Start with hope.
You're so wonderfully talking about hope. And I'll say a bind we're in with hope is that we tend to think of hope as having to do with a hope we have for something particular in the future, right? But it's in the present that we have the ability to co-create, influence our futures, right? It's the present where all the action is, and hope can actually be a distraction. I mean, it's sort of like that negative capability idea. In fact, a psychoanalyst, Bion, would say that you should enter every session with a patient without memory or desire. Again, sort of like not having that distracting future orientation, but a way to understand the future that actually gets us out of this dilemma. There's a whole field of future studies. It's got its own peer-reviewed journals. It goes by many names. And in that field, there are some basic ways that are understood to engage the future. Okay? One has to do with just projection, prediction, okay, and it's very objective. But there are these other more creative ways. And in fact, it's argued that when the situation is more complex, it's actually more creative ways that are called for. Because
Yes.
it's too complex just to deal with objectively. And one basic way of engaging with the future are social experiments now. Because what's done now has this evolutionary power. I mean, this even goes on at the way life works. Just in the replication of DNA. There are mechanisms in the replication of DNA that introduce random mutations. It's like life plays its way forward, but there are these adjacent possibilities at the edges of things all the time that can't be known until they're occupied. And so that's the role for experimentation now, like what people are doing in eco-villages, like what seems to be happening with BTS, all these wonderful things that you're describing. And that gets us out of this dilemma about how we think about the future. Because when we understand that a crucial way of engaging with future has to do with experimentation now in order to influence future, then we're focused in the now, which is where all the action is. And then in terms of uncertainty, I mean, there isn't even one future. There are multiple potential futures that we're in dynamic relationship with right now. And that's a very important thing for us to remind ourselves of, because again, that plants us in the now,
Yeah.
where we are. Um, and lastly, I think I just want to say what our job is. I think as clinicians, our job is to help people function well and hopefully thrive in relation to reality, right? And reality
Yeah.
includes this uncertainty. So in order to do this, we have to be allowing reality to penetrate and kind of host it in ourselves, in order to be able to help other people be with it, and it includes this uncertainty.
So good. Thank you for that, Janet.
Well, thank you for everything. I've been feeling like you were saying, you're doing what I have some words for.
We spend a lot of time in words too.
You're doing it.
Yeah, I would also say I feel like there are so many threads that you both have brought up that are worth so much more conversation. There was one question in the chat asking, can you say more about somatic therapy? So I'm interested in that response. And then also I'm really interested if Allison has any thoughts or reflections too.
Well, I can respond to the somatic therapy
Yeah,
thing.
go for it. Yeah.
Right. There are therapies that deliberately include somatic elements. Where you'll see a therapist ask, "Where are you feeling that in your body?" Um, and then as someone tunes in to the experience in the body, it's connected even more to particular feelings and thoughts, and helps with the metabolizing of that. So that's what I was referring to.
Allison.
Thanks for that added bit, Janet. Really appreciated. Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this conversation and thinking through chaplaincy identity or chaplain identity as I'm listening to Nicole and Janet and Emily, and so much of it is really resonant. For those for whom chaplaincy is a little bit of a reach, a beyond, who are those people and what do they really do kind of thing. Chaplains are really straddling the private and the public, as well as the emotional and the spiritual. So they're standing at the juncture of a lot of what we've been talking about today. And their charge really is to accompany people, to meet people where they are. And that means the spiritual but not religious, as well as the nuns, as well as those who hold a particular faith identity. And doing this work very much in the community. So I just was noting a few things that I think the rituals that Nicole lifted up around lament, and processing grief, and also the meaning making that Emily and Janet were talking about, is something that happens in that chaplaincy space. So as we're considering this profession, this field that is rapidly changing right now, and there's a lot of really good research that's coming out of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab about the ways in which chaplains are redefining what their work is. We're really excited to help chaplains recognize that the work that they're doing is always being done now in a climate changed world. And so the meaning making and the sense of hope and what constitutes future, thank you for the present and future language, Janet, is really so important for chaplains who are working in spaces such as higher education, with young people, with people who are concluding their lives and considering their legacy. So I'm really grateful for this conversation and the ways in which all of this kind of feeds into the ways in which we're thinking about chaplaincy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. I feel like I was having some similar thoughts about psychiatrist identity. as you both were talking, and I love the phrase accompanying people where they are, right? I feel like that's what psychiatrists are very much trying to do too. And Janet, just some of the things that you referenced about showing up with people in the present, is just having echoes of that too for me, Allison. Robin also made a comment here, or a question. The sense of losing our way with a moral foundation to our world seems to have created great psychic and spiritual pain. Can you comment on the way your areas of activity address this moral loss? Seems like the song which said, "Help us love," has something to do with the loss of moral direction, impairing our connection in relationships.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Robin. I mean, morality is a big topic, but just to hone on the piece of separation and the ways in which we are now living so separated, so separated. Like from each other, from the ways in which our bodies are created to connect with the more than human world. We are created to be in relationship, and we have made so many moves that separate us from that health and wholeness. So we do so much work on connection, on responding to that. Sometimes I invite people to go hug trees. I mean, to really find the intimacy in connecting for a moment. And there is a morality, there is a love in that. I see you unmuted. What do you want to add, please?
It seems to me that if we are connected with others and connected to the world that we live in, it creates the foundation for a moral sense of being. I will
Well, say
hold.
amen to that.
Yeah, I'll chime in with that. I think in moral injury, part of what's going on is that there's a real recognition of betrayal, um, and betrayal, by one's entire society, and that is hitting at a very basic developmental level, basic trust. And so absolutely the antidote is connection, like you're saying. And one thing that I've found in myself, very interestingly, is that as I've made some changes in my own life, more aligned with values, I'm recognizing more my own sense of moral revulsion, at the way things
Mm,
are being done. And I'm
mm,
recognizing I had been numbed to my own sense of moral revulsion. And so I think
yeah,
part of also what's so important is validating this, as
yeah.
people are expressing the moral injury.
Emily, can I give a couple resources from the BTS Center as we come to a close? And
Yes, absolutely.
right on this topic of what we're talking about, um, Allison had a really fabulous conversation with a chaplain colleague around moral suffering and moral resilience. And I highly recommend the recording. You can find it. Allison's going to pop some things in the chat. You can find it on our Climate Conscious Chaplaincy Initiative webpage. So there's lots of resources there, but there are some great video recordings, including that one. The other thing I'll invite Allison to pop in the chat is information on our summer fiction book club. So I referenced fiction and imagination, and so pick up a book and read it with us, join for those conversations, or just see the books we're reading and pick something up and do something imaginative with us. And last but not least, I'll invite Allison to pop in the chat the link for our podcast, which is called Climate Changed. You can follow the website link, or we're on all the platforms. So if you want to just find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Our most recent episode was on complicated hope, and the one that's going to be released next week is on ecological grief. And these themes have peppered throughout our podcast episodes. So I just invite you to peruse the titles and pick one that sounds right to you.
And if we're plugging, I'll plug the Climate Psychiatry Alliance has an upcoming disaster mental health series that you can check out on the website. And I think the link the link has been put in for that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much, Janet. I realized at the beginning I did not tell everyone we also have an opportunity to linger if anyone would like to. If you have some burning questions that you were a little too shy or embarrassed to pop in the chat or to ask us, please stay on. We are going to stop recording, but we would love to have anyone stay and chat with us. I just want to say this was